Psychedelics, psychedelics, psychedelics. I can't believe I'm saying that word. I have to say it 3 times just to convince myself. I'm 67 years old, and of course I fooled around with acid and some other things 40 years ago. But just found psychedelics at this ripe age. 3 in particular: ayahuasca, iboga, and San Pedro. And in the last 4 months, I've done 16 trips with these little rascals. I want to talk about it because I was never going to do it in my whole life. I never would have considered it. My 2 kids are flipping out at the fact that not only am I doing it, but I'm absolutely loving it. I'll give you a little hint of how it works. On my first time that I took iboga, which is a root from Africa, you chew this, at least the way we did it, is you chew this root, and then about an hour later you take a pill, which is a more concentrated version of it. Within about 3 minutes of chewing it, I started to feel some things going on with me already, but I'm fairly sensitive, so I would. Maybe an hour and a half into it, a process started in my head, the likes of which I've never experienced before, which is we've got our own internal database, which is what we've seen, heard, and felt, smelled, and tasted. Iboga came in and started defragmenting and optimizing my entire database that I've seen, heard, felt, experienced, thought. And it took this mess in my head and shrunk it up, not by making anything smaller, but by not having empty spaces between, or not nearly as big ones. It turned out that this huge space of experience that I thought I had fit in this tiny little bit of my mind or my thinking. And I had this vast openness. Suddenly, when I would think, I wouldn't have to go around and collect different pieces. You know how with your computer is fragmented, you've got pieces of data files all over the place. The same thing happens in our own personal database. So suddenly I was able to get what I wanted as far as a thought, a memory, anything like that, instantaneously, instead of the fractions of a second that it would take to go other places to get it. My thinking got instantaneously clearer. Meanwhile, that was taking place on the back burner. Meanwhile, on the front burner, I was seeing all kinds of things, the likes of which I've never seen before, mass quantities of hallucinations. We did it by a fire, and the fire is dancing with all sorts of different animals in it. The moon was high, and the clouds are forming all kinds of different shapes. 24 hours worth of just wild, wonderful, incredible experiences, the likes of which I've never had before. And it appears that what it did, and I can't verify this scientifically, I'm not interested in doing so, was that my whole mind, my whole brain lit up. So I was using much more of it than I normally do, and it was so incredibly exciting. At the same time, it was imperative to surrender to it, because any kind of resistance to it whatsoever seems to yield a bad trip. You just can't resist it. You have to go with it. And we're used to a certain quantity of stimuli in a day. This was offering months and months and months worth of stimuli in a very short period of time. So it was like being just lit up. It was, I'm normally quite creative. I've led workshops for many years and written books, and I'm creative. but I have 10 or 15 possibilities to hook to anything. This suddenly offered hundreds of different possibilities. It was if my central processing unit got so on fire, so lit up, so capable that I was able to have many hundreds of things going on at the same time rather than one or two or three. It just offered a kind of richness and at the same time a really, really deep sense of connectedness and well-being. Iboga in particular, and the tribes in Gabon use it. They're finding fascinating uses for it with depression, with drug addiction, with people being able to quit things that they haven't found any other ways that they can have them quit. It turns out that it's a beautiful starting point at any age to a new life as well. Iboga is like a great-great-grandfather who's incredibly wise. It works, if you want to enter taking the medicine with some questions, and I'll just give you an example of that. I've had a kind of tightness on the top of my head for a long time, and I would have people rub it for me or go get it worked on or something because it was pressure up there. And I said, Iboga, my head. And it said, oh, that's simple. And it said, just bring in a whole lot of colored helium balloons and have them float up and push up on the inside of your head. And I went, okay, I can do that. And so I did that. And then it painted some kind of, the medicine painted some kind of paste on the upper part. And it's now been several months and I have no more pain in my head, and that was chronic for decades. You can carry on an ongoing conversation with Iboga in which you will discover what might very well be your own clarity to a degree that's very, very uncommon. It was just mind-blowing how absolutely brilliant and easy it is to answer problems that could be stopping one for a lifetime. Ayahuasca's a different sort of trip. Ayahuasca's more of a female spirit. In both of these cases, tribes have been doing them for hundreds of years. And of course, they're just brand new to me. But ayahuasca offered a female spirit huge quantities of downloads of visualizations. I could call them hallucinations, but I'm not sure they were hallucinations because as I take medicine, I'm not sure what's real and what's not real anymore. I used to have some idea that I could know the difference between the two. Ayahuasca is a substantially shorter trip than Iboga. It often, for lots of people, results in purging, which can take the form of vomiting, for sure, and that's what it's gotten known for. I never once purged on ayahuasca, but that's probably simply because I never tried to avoid anything that it was communicating with me. I just didn't perceive any reason to do it, and ayahuasca tends to bring up the parts of ourselves that we haven't been willing or able to explore, and it sticks them right in our face. And I've watched people have quite glorious purges. If you've done this or are going to do it, it's worth noting a couple things that I've learned about ayahuasca. One is throwing up on ayahuasca is not like normal throwing up. It's actually a tremendously positive experience. It gets rid of what you need to get rid of. And it can happen so quickly and then you're done with it. It's not a problem anymore. all of these medicines are a degree of generative, generating positive life changes in ways that I simply don't know anything else that would do it like this. I've been leading courses for about 35 years. Had I known what I know now, we would have been doing these shamanic medicines at the first course and every course from then on, because it just opens people. It softens them, it opens them, it makes them more capable, it brings them into the flow of things. It would have made my job much easier, because I had to attempt to generate that kind of presence and flow in people. San Pedro is mescaline. It's found in the dark green right underneath the skin of a cactus called San Pedro. That one of the three is just uplifting and positive. It again entails loads of hallucinations, but it's just a level of happiness and joy mixed with wisdom. Any of these that you're taking have some mechanism, probably your phone, around to record, because you're going to come up with brilliance. And it's worth recording so you could listen to it later, or so that people can listen to them, because your brilliance might be forgotten, and that way it's recorded. Three things in particular seem to be really important with these medicines. One is who, which is who you take it with. If you're taking it with someone, which I would highly recommend, if there's any way you can find someone who knows these things, who knows the medicine. I found somebody who had done over 500 trips with about 8,500 people. So she already knew the terrain backwards and forwards. That gave me a kind of confidence that was very cool. But who you do it with, makes a gigantic difference. It can be a spiritual trip, or it could be a scary trip. It could be any kind of trip, depending on who you do it with. So be careful who you do it with. Do it with someone you trust. Do it with somebody you enjoy. Do it with somebody who knows a little bit of the terrain, who can hold your hand for as long as you need it held, if you need it held. And if you don't have people like that in your life, before you do psychedelics, get some people like that in your life, because they're really worth having. Be that for some people, and get some people who are that for you. So who you do it with is vital. What you do, make sure that what you're doing is good medicine, as opposed to something from a bad source. They can slip any kind of junk into these things. Make sure you're doing it with people who are legitimate. And dosing is absolutely vital. Too much of it, and you aren't likely to damage yourself, but you're likely to ask more of yourself. It always works to take less and work your way up to taking more. And the other thing is where you do it. You want to do it in a place that's really, truly safe for you. In the case of 14 of my 16 experiences, they were in Panama, in a beautiful home on a mountainside overlooking a valley. Just beautiful, gorgeous terrain with people that I trusted and knew well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 trips isn't enough. You need to do more, because among other things, a lot of us have built up backup of stuff that we've blocked or tried to stay away from or repressed or resisted. in your first few trips, it's highly likely that those things are going to come out. Those are simply the medicine taking care of things in you that you've been carrying around for a long time. On the other side of those, and it's interesting, the woman who has done the over 500 trips marks out after 50 trips, the experience changed in this way. After 150 trips, it changed in this way. Under this many trips, it changed in that way. She's not telling you how it's going to be for you, but she's laying out a groundwork of the medicine. It has an intent, and its intent is to take care of you. Not necessarily who you currently perceive yourself to be, but who you are at a substantially deeper level than that. One of the things that comes along with the medicine is meeting many more aspects of yourself than you normally would. And that can be a little scary for people. That's why you need to do it in the right place with the right people. I would recommend doing all three without a preference for any of the three. Any questions?
You talked about the openness aspect of it, and that you would use this to get people open to a certain level that it would.
Yeah, to put it really bluntly, people bullshit a lot, and they bullshit themselves. And they make up stories and they create illusions and they have a tendency to believe their thoughts. When you take medicine, there's no bullshit. It's the end of it. So everything becomes very real very fast. And that's the kind of people I want in a workshop, the people that have already realized or up against that, it's kind of an odd way to put it, but up against the wall of reality, rather than spinning out more and more illusions. Generally, as we get older, we spin more and more illusion until we've got pretty much only illusion left. What we think is true, how we think things are, all of that stuff. Medicine has no respect for any of that. It has immense respect for who you are. As a matter of fact, one of the things I discovered before I even took it is that it works to view the medicine as an entity that's coming in and co-creating who you are. You're co-creating with it. And it offers you a kind of honesty that is very uncommon except in its presence. So what I would want is I would want to work with people who are familiar with that kind of honesty.
So is honesty and real kind of
yes.
the same category? Okay.
Yes.
So your work for many years, and I've been following you for 20 years, is been to get people to that realness or to that honesty. And if you can get them there, then there's new places to go, new models.
Yeah, I hate to layer this stuff, but it's layered, so there's no way around it, really. The objective is to get into the present, which is where we all live. But we've created things, we've created illusions, we've made up things, we've decided what's true, what's not true. That's separated us from the present. It's moved us out from there. The present is where real lives, and it's where we actually are. But in general, we don't have much experience of it. Medicine quickly returns us to the present, where if you're sitting there or lying there, you just experience being there. Just with nothing added, with nothing left out, with nothing put in, you're just right there. And from that point, you can meet yourself, and you can meet the next moment freely. Most of us simply don't live like that.
So I want to ask you exactly into that. Most of us don't live like that. When I've talked to different people and talk about this kind of work and getting more real and getting honest and finding out more about who they are, they're like, I am who I am. I already know who I am. What's the benefit of what you got? Why go your way?
Yes.
And to us, it's like there's an obvious, from the experiences of it. But what do you say to somebody like that? Or do you even say anything to somebody like that?
I'll generally, if I'm in the mood, I'll have a conversation with somebody like that. And what moves them to the next step of self-exploration is generally they have things in their life that are persistently or chronically not working. Whether it's in relationship, whether it's in job, whether it's in their general level of satisfaction, they'll bring that out fairly quickly. And then it's possible to point out, because they won't even notice that they brought it out, you point it out to them that they've... I was sitting on an airplane on the way back from Panama, and I was talking to the guy, my seatmate, who looked very conservative, very cut and dried, and yet he's having 2 bourbons on an hour-and-a-half flight. So I know clearly that something's wrong, because why do you need 2 bourbons on an hour-and-a-half flight? I just really needed water, but that's because I was dehydrated. I didn't necessarily need bourbon with him. Fairly quickly, it became obvious that he's stressed out by his job. He buys companies. He buys quite a lot of companies, and then he has the people who own them run them, but he's the controlling interest in them. In a short conversation with me, he discovered the beauty of what he does. He discovered the power what he does. It's ridiculous to say that because one would think he already knew that. He didn't. I offered him the possibility of looking at what he does with fresh eyes, looking at what he does without his programmed response to what he does, looking at what he does without the history of what he does, looking at what he does from the present. And then oddly, here I am, a pretty straight-laced guy, and here he is a pretty straight-laced guy, and we're talking about psychedelics, and he's fascinated at the prospect of taking these and discovering that the world is substantially bigger and more interesting than anything he's fathomed it to be. And he's talking about his mother, who's a psychotherapist and has written 3 books, and he's talking about reading them, and he's talking about applying them. What he needed to get was that I get him. And the simple way that I showed him that I got him, which was incredibly enjoyable for me, because flying, the skies aren't as friendly as they may appear. So it's not that much fun. It was crammed in seats, although we had a bulkhead. But he got that I could offer him insights about this business he's been doing forever that he's never had. And so then he says these fabulous words. He says, I want some of what you have. Beautiful. And as soon as they want some of what you have, until they do, it's not of interest at all. I just had a woman and her 2 kids visit. Her kids are 4 and 6. She watched as I interacted with her kids in much more effective ways than she does. In the present, we have vast quantities of possibilities. And I don't mean to ignore what you said, because all these people think they live in the present already. I understand that. And God bless them. And they will have a very interesting time if they ever take medicine. Because one of the things you discover really quickly, which is very difficult for many people, is you discover that you're way, 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 way more wonderful than you imagined yourself to be. So much more wonderful that it's virtually unfathomable in any normal way of thinking. The size and variability of context that those medicines offer. If you haven't done it, you couldn't want it. If you have done it, you want more. Which, by the way, brings in a very important aspect of these. There's no addiction to them at all. People who haven't done it think there'd be an addiction. In the case of ayahuasca and to almost that extent San Pedro, the stuff tastes so horrible, so completely and utterly horrible, that, and the woman who served as my guide said, believe me, as you take these, they will taste worse. And I think that's going to keep going. The last time I did ayahuasca, and I could never believe this would happen, but I took it. It's just in a shot glass. And it almost came right up. I couldn't stand it. It was so horrible tasting. And I'm somebody who can eat all kinds of healthy stuff and eat all kinds of horrible, healthy tasting stuff that most people wouldn't. This is awful. And Iboga, who would want a 24-hour trip? Who would have time for a 24-hour trip in their life that will be completely unpredictable, but will make a gigantic contribution? It will move them ahead in the way that they're going to progress so much that it's just... this must be love. The medicine offers a kind of honesty and insight, the likes of which I've wanted my whole life and attempted to offer to thousands of other people. And it's right there. And you take this funky stuff that comes right from Mother Nature, and suddenly you're way more than you imagined that you were. So your question is, how do you make them want it? I think. And you don't. And I realize that this is what I've been doing for 35 years, is I've been trying to sell people themselves. So you sell them on themselves. And naturally, who they are will want more. And medicine offers substantially more. It doesn't offer the avoidance of any number of drugs that people regularly take. It invites a deeper, clearer look at what's actually here. And that kind of clarity, it turns out, through microdosing and stuff like that, there are an awful lot of creative types and driven types in Silicon Valley and all over that want that very badly. At the same time, there are a lot of people who are depressed and don't have any idea that these sort of medicines can actually shift a depression in a very short period of time. They take what's stuck and invite it to get moving. And I can't even believe, because I've only been at this for 4 months, I can't believe I'm advocating them this completely. But I am. It's too beneficial, all wrapped in too much fun. Past a certain age, we have a tendency to imagine what's going to come next. Medicine offers any one of thousands of possibilities as what's going to come next. And there's nothing that feeds our attention more than that. And when our attention is fed, when our attention is nurtured, when our attention is taken care of, we naturally want to be more alive, we want to be more awake, and we are. And medicine does just that.
You, a lot of the words, going back to the previous question, is you answered it without thinking you answered it, at least to me, is what we talked about in the last video we did is you're introducing it to themselves, and it seemed like the way your excitement with it, but the words you were using was big and gigantic and so much and huge, and those are things when we were a kid, when we were children, that was what got our attention. Wow, look at how big. I remember you saying something about somebody at NASA one time where you said I gave him a piece of information he probably hadn't heard in a long time. Those are really big, and it got your attention. These rockets were huge. And I think when we let people know that how beautiful they are, how big they are, that if you can exemplify that, what you're doing, that gets somebody interested.
Yeah, along with that, and it's really quite important, just an experience on medicine. It goes on one side of the spectrum to bigger. It goes on another side of the spectrum to smaller. Because as you're tripping on ayahuasca and you're perceiving all kinds of things, and it's far out and wonderful, you can zoom in on some little tiny aspect of it and discover how holographic the tiniest, most subtle thing is too. So it's huge. It's also incredibly tiny. And it's everywhere in between.
So it's fractal, like a fractal.
Uh-huh.
But the idea of the sense, it seems like in the tiny, I don't know if you've seen those, they have them on the internet where they take magnifications times 10. So they go out to the edges of the universe times 10 exponentially, and then they go down exponentially the same way. And it's just as big down as is up. And the seeing the fractal, the sameness, the similarity.
Yeah, the discovery of the universe within us being the same size roughly as the universe without us is a pretty big step.
But like you said, introducing people to that and letting them know, because I think we search on the outside because we think the outside is bigger or where the answers are. And your work is about going inside and introducing to the bigness of them.
Yes. And at the same time, I'm not sure it has to be sold.
Yeah.
I'm suspecting that on a regular basis, with a little bit of patience, which is vital when it comes to medicine, people will notice the difference. And they'll ask. And I discovered a long time ago when I was a broker at Shearson Lehman Brothers, placing outgoing calls was a lot more difficult than taking incoming calls. Because the outgoing calls, you're meeting somebody who's not particularly interested. This guy on the airplane was drinking his brandy confidently, and he was presenting in front of a business that he had just acquired the next day, and he went from that to tremendous joy as we walked off the airport together and walked through the airport together as if we knew each other and had known each other for a very long period of time. It's unlikely that either one of us will recover from that experience. An example of this would be that we wouldn't expect to get that close that fast. I expect to get that close that fast with everybody all the time. Medicine isn't interested in our made-up limitations. It isn't interested in how long we think something takes. Just what Iboga did as far as reorganization and optimization and defragmentation of my mind was done at roughly the speed of light. It was done really, really, really unbelievably fast. If I hadn't done this work the number of years I have, I wouldn't have known that it was even taking place. It was done so fast. It doesn't care about time and space. It simply doesn't care about time and space. Later trips offered great refinement on that process, in which it would get things done in periods of time that it couldn't be done. Looking at us, we're time-bound and space-bound on a regular basis. We say, I don't have enough time to do that. There's not enough room to do that. We can't do that. We can't do this. We can't do that. We can't do this. Medicine throws the doors open and says, there is no time, there is no space. What would you like? Absolutely no time, no space. Help yourself. So just if the only thing it offered was a vacation from the pressure, the claustrophobic nature of time and space, that would be sufficient. But it offers much more than that. It offers snakes. It offers going back if you want to and talking to long dead relatives. It offers just absolutely any inclination can become a full-blown experience. But it begins with the complete dissolution of time and space. We tend to forget that time and space were made up by us, and we become limited by our creation. And time and space is really cool creation, but they're also tyrants. They just beat us up all day long with, we got to get there by then, we got to get here by now, it's just, it's crazy.
So these constructs that we make, these illusions, as you call them, that we make, and they're slave drivers, really. And that you're saying that it's almost like there's something out there waiting to help us and to give us new possibilities.
Yeah. Medicine is waiting to give us all that. And along with that, I call them illusions because it's a shortcut, but I don't really think that anything's illusionary. I think it's all true. Only do we want to live on a level at which that's true? That's the question we need to ask ourselves. This appears true to me right now. What level do I have to stay on? Because we're made of all these levels. What level do I have to stay on to keep that being true? And generally, we have to stay in a very small range to keep something true. Medicine says, how about we open the whole thing and you're allowed to access all of these different levels of you, and you don't have to worry about what's true anymore. You don't have to try and be truthful. You don't even imagine that you could own the truth. One of the primary competitions we're engaged in is finding the truth. It's all truth. Only do you want to live on a level at which something in particular is true? I'm too good for my wife. That's true. She's too good for me. That's true too. And we belong together and neither one of us is better than the other one. That's true too. I have a lot of money. That's true. I don't have any money at all. That's true too. You know, I compare myself to Bill Gates, I have no money. I compare myself to the guy on the street, I have a lot of money. We forget to pay attention to Einstein's relativity until medicine comes knocking on the door and say, and remember what you thought was really, 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 really true? Well, forget it. You're expending huge quantities of energy attempting to keep that true, and it's not true.
So if it blows out the levels, I'll give you a quick experience. One time I was doing something where it just really threw me out of my body so fast and so hard that I thought I was dying, and I kind of started freaking out. And I was out like outside of my body, and then I was like, wow, you know, I want to go back. And then And this voice said, do you really want to go back? And it was like, in the same way.
I love your question because it addresses something really important. Many people's response when offered medicine is fear. They're scared because they don't know what's going to happen. And one of the primary things they're afraid of, besides losing control, which is probably number one, is fear of a bad trip, which is what I think you're describing there somewhat. A bad trip which you discovered wasn't really a bad trip.
In an instant.
The best trips in the world are the worst trips of all. Because the worst trips of all take you to those places that you never wanted to go to, and it turns out that it's okay. And when you don't have to attempt to avoid those places anymore, you can actually live freely, you can live openly. But the more places you're trying to avoid, the less freely you can live. You want to die as many times on a trip as you possibly can, because then if you live through the trip, guess what? You don't have to be afraid of death anymore. You don't have to be afraid of any of that anymore. We are a culture that's afraid of growing up and deathly afraid of surrendering. Medicine offers both. Growing up meaning beginning to experience our connection with all things rather than keeping ourselves tiny, which is really the essence of immaturity. It just isn't interested in supporting our commitment to tininess. People discover that vomiting is quite wonderful. One of the things they don't do often enough is vomit. I did vomit once on Iboga. It was fascinating to me. I was sitting on the toilet in the midst of my 24-hour trip, and instantly I noticed that I was nauseous. And I had a bucket with me, because a bucket is your best friend in these experiences, just in case you need it. And it was less than 6 seconds between when I noticed my nauseousness and when I vomited twice. The first one was dry, the second one there was a little stuff. I don't mean too many details here, but and then my nauseousness was gone. I thought of how many times I've laid in bed, sick to my stomach, for an hour before I vomited, just excruciating, awful. This was 6 seconds, probably 8.5 seconds from beginning to end. And then I did the oddest thing. I went back into the room where I was going to lie down. I lay down and felt miserable for hours. That was on me. That was my stuff. I showed myself the miserable time that I thought I should have connected with being nauseous.
Based on past experience, right?
Based on who knows what, but probably past experience. And then I just watched and I watched and I watched. And I went, are you really going to do this to yourself? And the answer was yes. And I kept watching. And it wasn't, one of the things we discover is that in the things that we try to avoid the most, there is both positive and wonderful. There's great and awful, because great and awful is just made up by us. It's not, it doesn't really exist in the world. So I lay there and gave myself an awful time for hours. It doesn't, believe me, I can do that. I proved it. And I enjoyed every single moment of it. It was just an absolute riot. And I also now can show myself a bad time for a moment, and then it's gone. It's really funny. I see Socrates saying, know thyself, and then I see him taking some ayahuasca or iboga or San Pedro. I'm not sure they had it back then, but I would have loved to have seen him pulled out of his rational approach to things to an expansive approach to things for a little bit. Might have actually redefined where we go and how we go as a population.
Let me ask you this question. Again, I'm looking at the pattern aspect of this. It seems that we go to certain levels and then we condition ourselves that each new level that we go to, we have a buffer zone to get us there, and that these hallucinogenics propel us so fastly past that we don't have anything there, and it's time for a new discovery while we're out in the midst of nowhere to be able to look
what you're talking about there is space management. When you're talking about the different levels and the buffer zones, you're talking about how we handle space,
exactly,
as opposed to how we handle time. And they offer an experience outside of space. So we waste an awful lot of our time and an awful lot of our energy attempting to remember where we are. Because, I mean, if we thought we were in our kitchen when we were in our bedroom, it gets difficult to cook. But when you do away with space, you don't have to expend your energy anymore to remember where you are, because suddenly, when you're not space-bound, you're everywhere.
What does that give you?
Yeah, I'll tell you what it gives you. The power that it gives you is extraordinary, which is there's something that you want and that almost everybody wants almost all the time, and medicine offers it. What we want is we want to be able to be in more than one place at the same time. We have a huge grudge on the fact that we can only be in one place at a time. And we've set it up so that we almost always want to be in some place other than the place that we are. It's really quite a setup. And what medicine says is, how about you're every place? How about you're just every place? I'll share another experience. This was on ayahuasca. Ayahuasca showed up in here, and I had heard she does this sometimes. And she said, follow me. And I like to only be told something once. So I followed her really quickly. And instantaneously, I'm back in this cave, and there's a fire. And there's a caveman sitting by the fire. And it's as real as can be. I'm really, honest to goodness, sitting in the cave, and I can smell the fire, and I can smell the caveman, and here we are. And I get up, and I walk toward the back of the cave, and at the back of the cave, I enter another world. And in this other world is what happened before the cave people. There was a huge population. Now, whether or not there was, who knows? But I was let know on the trip that there was this huge population before the cave people who accomplished getting to know themselves completely and everything else. They completed the game called life, called human life. They just totally completed it. And once they completed it, they left. And then the whole process started over again with a cave person. So I realized that we're going to complete this whenever we do, probably not during my lifetime with how things look, but at some point, and then it's going to start over. The whole experiment. I had never seen this and experienced it fully as cyclical. The evolution of man to me was the evolution of man, and that's it. I forgot that if they get to a certain point, there's no particular reason for them to be here anymore, so they leave and it starts over. I don't know how many times it started over like that, but I have a tendency in my day-to-day problems in my day-to-day life to imagine that where I am is important, and how much time I have is important, and who I am is important. And by the time I've added that much importance, I'm so serious, I forget that there's any entertainment or levity in anything. And pretty soon I'm serious all the time.
Forgetting the big game.
Forgetting that the game is over when we accomplish all of that stuff, and then we start over. And then I'll be sitting by a fire. And then instantaneously, once I met that other culture, and by the way, I was able to step right into what it felt like to be them, having completed the game. Wow. And I sat with that, I don't know how long, because we don't have clocks around when we do the medicine, but it was a while I basked in the perfection of that, just pouring it through. It just, I mean, everywhere it pours through. Then ayahuasca led me quickly to one of her layers in which she just hangs out. And there was this kind of odd-looking guy with glasses and long hair, and he goes up to where people are and comes back with reports for ayahuasca, reporting on what's taken place, so that she doesn't have to go out unless she wants to. It's just the economy of it all. And this person, who didn't look like much, had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of possibilities more than I had with everything. And I went, whoa, what I've always wanted. And ayahuasca said, from now on, rather than just knowing you have possibilities, you can flaunt them. Feel free to come in with all of your possibilities right up front, anytime, anywhere. It's impossible to have too many. Nice. And I just went, thank you, dear. Thank you, dear. That's very nice. I obviously don't have a lot of experience with this. I have a lot of experience exploring human beings in my 35 years of workshops, short experience with medicine. We've done it in a very unstructured manner. It's offered quite often with shamans. It's offered quite often in almost Catholic proclamations of how it should be done and what should be done. And I just advocate an absence of dogma when you're doing the medicines rather. Make sure you're around great people. Make sure you're around a great place. Dose yourself correctly, but don't pay attention to anybody who tells you it has to be done this way. It has to be done that way. It has to be done this other way. This is just the way it's done. It's just their way of attempting to maim the medicine so that you don't have a free-form, artistic, creative experience.
Well, going with your last story, the whole thing is about possibilities. Why would you not have unlimited possibilities of how it's done?
Because you're terrified. Because if you view the shaman as the answer to it, if you view the shaman spraying you with some stuff and having you do this as the answer to everything, then you don't have to step up and take personal responsibility for your own trip anymore. Somebody else has already done it, and you think you're going to live through it somehow by actually missing it. That's why. That's why would you have a priest consult you on how to have a long-term relationship work? Because a romantic relationship, because they aren't even allowed to have them. Well, that's the same reason that people, shamans, and not certainly all of them by any stretch, but shamans have they're human, and they can move toward dogma too. They can say, this is what you do it, and this is what you should be seeing now. And this is, 70-some% of people see snakes on ayahuasca. I don't think that's necessary.
So it's an archetype almost. It's just a meme.
Yes.
Spiritual meme.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're good at that.
Yeah.
We've done that ever since the beginning of time. As cave people, we put a line on the cave, and then we had a successful hunt, and that line became what we used to contribute to our hunt. Or we put a mark on a bone hook, and then that's the hook that caught more fish, and we make them with that mark on it from then on. That's medicine is deeply personal. It's extraordinarily personal. I have a friend who's a emergency room doctor, and he tends to view the medicines he prescribes as being real things that have certain influences on people. The same moment in medicine with these shamanic medicines can be completely different for the same person. In other words, the range of what's possible with these, my friend who's done over 500 trips hasn't found the range.
Well, how do you write a DSM book without that?
Yeah, I understand. How do you write a Bible without that? How do you write a textbook without that? They put together textbooks, and then they say you should listen to this music during the ceremony. And then they say you should do these movements, and you should have these feathers, and you should have... I understand, maybe you should, but maybe you don't need them. That's a little wacky. But venturing into where other people have never been can be a little scary sometimes. It also can further your experience of individuality, which leads, oddly enough, to a deeper connection with every human on the planet. It's not through blending with a culture that we do that. It's through reaching the end of our individuality that we get to once again connect fully with what we know of ourselves.
So when you pop out to this level of connection and possibility, is that love? Is that what's holding us together?
Love and pleasure. But pleasure not defined as, most people define pleasure as this but not that. This is pleasure as any experience or sensation that confirms your existence. And there is no experience that doesn't confirm or sensation that doesn't confirm your existence. When we're the most depressed or upset we ever are, that's what's confirming our existence. There's everything we do confirms our existence, and that's what we should embrace, and that's pleasure. And when somebody has what they call a horrible trip, that's pleasure too. If they can't deal with his pleasure, chances are pretty good they say, no more medicine for me. If you're not regularly, when you take medicine, if you don't swear it off permanently at the end of the trip or at numerous points along the trip, it ain't really a trip. You promise yourself, I am never doing this again for anything. I am never doing it again for anything. And then, of course, you do.
Yeah, because really see how people get off addictions and out of depression if they're propelled into that level of who they are, whether it's inside or out, wherever that is, and to have that, the pleasure and the love and the possibilities and the connection that's there. Wow, magic.
Yeah, and I'm sure that over time science is going to find physiological explanations for all this too. I heard somebody make a distinction the other day between a researcher who duplicates things and a searcher. He was saying he's a searcher. Me too. I don't have any interest in reproducing. I have much greater interest in alchemy, which is doing the same thing and producing a completely different result. And then more of a different result, and then more of a different result, and then more of a different result. As that, medicine is my friend. because it offers a level of physiological and psychological and spiritual flexibility, diversity, unpredictability that nothing else I've come across does. And until you know this to be a universe of just vast variation, you don't know much about the universe at all. You're a limiting force in the universe as opposed to one who's naturally breathing and expanding and contracting as the universe does. And that's, to me, one of the primary gifts that medicine has to offer. I can't speak for other medicines, and I can't speak in depth, really, of the 3 that I've done. I will do more and update as I do.
Yeah, I'd love to be there while you update.
Yeah.
About your updates.
Well, or they're doing it.
Yes.
Because do it, but be careful who you do it with, what you do, and where you do it. But remember that almost all of you are younger than me, so it's you might be too young to do it, but probably not. Have some fun.